Hi everyone, today's video I'm going to be addressing a comment that was left by my friend SiriusMined, who asked, is it possible that Baal, the word, is derived from El? I'm thinking Baal eventually becoming Baal. And there is a good reason for thinking about that. Because when we look at other Near Eastern religions, it's specifically around the time that maybe the Yahwist or the Elohist author would have written, there are parallels with other gods, other deities, and other Near Eastern traditions. So, like in the Sumerian and Akkadian tradition, they have Belu, who's a northwestern Semitic influence, which also had Baal. They also had a feminine version of this title, which is Baalah, that was used as a title for various deities. It was a very vague title. We see this in Mesopotamian and Semitic pantheons. It's only when it's used with a definitive article or an epithet that context can be established for a specific individual rather than a group of people. So scholars think that the cult of Hadad may have also had an important role to play in this. The true name of Hadad came to be seen as too holy. We actually see a parallel of this in the Israelite faith, where Yahweh is written out as the Tetragrammatron. I might be pronouncing that, I'm sure I'm pronouncing that very incorrectly, but it's the reason that Yahweh's name is frequently spelled with the consonants and not the vowels, so YHWH as opposed to Yahweh. In fact, because of the way that it's written in Hebrew literature, in Israelite literature, we're not even sure that saying Yahweh is correct, but it seems like the most likely. So because of that, the alias Lord was used, which was also Baal or Baal. So was the title Bel, which was used for Marduk, and eventually Adonai was used for Yahweh. And we actually know this because when Jesus is on the cross and he's dying, he cries out, Adonai, Adonai, which actually means Father, Father. He says, why have you forsaken me? I don't remember the rest of the Aramaic that's specifically spoken. So regardless of the original relationship, by the first millennium BCE, the two, Baal and Yahweh, were actually pretty distinct from one another. Baal and Hadad were distinct from one another, where Hadad was worshipped by the Arameans and Baal by the Phoenicians and other Canaanites. Regardless, the Ugaritic records, Ugarit being another Near Eastern Semitic community, show Baal as a god of storms. And this is something that's picked up again in the Israelite faith. In the creation story, God is, commands over the waters, fights beasts in the waters. There is the flood story, which shows control over the waters. So Baal specifically had control over lightning, wind, weather, rain, and fertility. And while fertility is not necessarily mentioned, Yahweh is assumed to be God of everything. And this is an important time to bring up that the Israelite faith isn't a monotheistic faith, but is what's called a henotheistic faith, which means very specifically that the Israelites acknowledge that there are other gods, but they only worship one, which was Yahweh. So, the worship of Baal and Canaan was connected to the region's dependence in rainfall for its agriculture. So, this is, again, a reason that we know that the Mesopotamian faith, or the Mesopotamian region, is responsible for writings of the Ark story, the flood story, because as opposed to the dry desert region of Israel, or what was Canaan, Mesopotamia and Egypt are usually pretty flooded and look for irrigation systems in order to get rid of the heavy rainfall that they received. And anxiety about the necessity of rainfall in order to sustain their agriculture is what prompted the worship of the rain god, or the weather god that was Baal, and eventually influenced the characteristics of Yahweh in that same region. So when we look at the title of El, El was a supreme god for the Canaanites. He was the father of mankind and all creatures. One position is that the identification of Yahweh with El is pretty late. I mean, we can tell this because, as we know, the Yahwist author wrote the earliest of any of the contributors to the Pentateuch. The Elohist came almost not directly after, but shortly after him. And so Yahweh was thought of as one of many gods. We see this with the council in Job, where the high beings, the high council, the divine council, meet to talk about how they will treat Job and the awful bet that they place against him. In much of the Hebrew Bible, the name El is an alternate name for Yahweh, but with the Elohist in the priestly traditions, it is conceived as an earlier name than Yahweh. We see, though it is used as a title for God, we see it in Exodus 15:11. So, who is like you among the gods? Elim, Yahweh. In Daniel 11:36, and the king will do according to his pleasure, and he will exalt himself and magnify himself over every god, El, and against the God of gods, Elim, he will speak outrageous things and will prosper until the indignation is accompanied for that which is decided will be done. So, in both these instances, with Baal and with El, we see them both as referring to a specific god, but also being used as a vague title to refer to multiple groups of gods or to higher leaders within the social circle that the community is involved in. So, SiriusMined, I don't know if I necessarily answered your question, but it seems that both these titles derive from similar backgrounds, from a similar god, if not similar gods, and are used in a very similar fashion. So I don't think it's a stretch of the imagination to say that both of these titles, El and Baal, or Baal, necessarily are independent of one another. They very likely seem to have a similar background because they're used very similarly. So I hope that answered your question. Thank you for listening. A much shorter video today, but I hope that people got some information out of it. Again, any of the information that you're curious about that I presented, I've put links below. And thank you so much for checking me out.